All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the virtual National Adaptation Forum event, Good Business, How Companies Are Building Climate Resilience and Helping Communities to Do the Same. My name is Carrie Schaefer, and I am the project coordinator for the National Adaptation Forum. I'm going to do a quick introduction here in the beginning, and then we will go ahead and get started. To begin, I would like to thank our sponsor AT&T for supporting this event. I encourage you all to visit our website to learn more about their climate work, including the Climate Risk and Resilience portal. For this session, we will obviously be using GoToWebinar, so I wanted to take a moment to orient you all to the software. Your control panel may look different depending on whether you are using the desktop app or connecting through the web browser, but the functionality is going to be the same. The main controls I have highlighted here. So we have audio controls, which are shown in yellow, that are going to allow you to control your input sound. The full screen button is shown in green, and then we have the Q&A tab shown in blue. So following our panel discussion, we will have time for audience questions. So feel free to be sending in questions throughout the event. And then to wrap up, I want to note that a recording of this webinar is going to be uploaded to the National Adaptation Forum website within the week. And in addition, we will have a post-event survey for all of our participants to better understand what we did and where we can improve, and we would love to get your feedback on that. And so with that, I will pass it over to our moderator, Reese May.
Well, thank you, Carrie, and thank you very much to our friends at EcoAdapt for hosting today's panel. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining and spending a little bit of time with us here today. My name is Reese May, and I am the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for SBP. We're a nonprofit disaster preparedness and recovery organization that began after Hurricane Katrina, and we now serve low-income communities around the country before, during, and after disasters. I've personally worked on community recovery and resilience issues since 2011 in more than a dozen states and communities now, and I'm very excited to moderate today's discussion. I'd like to set the stage, if I can, with just two slides before I introduce our very impressive panel. If you take a look at this first slide, and both of these are from NOAA, if you take a look at this first slide, you can see by looking at the bars and that vertical growth that the frequency of extreme events is increasing over time. If you track the black line just beneath the crest of each bar, you can also see that the average cost associated with these events is increasing over time. In 2023, the United States had 28 distinct weather events. That's 28 distinct events that caused more than $1 billion in damage each. From hot to cold, from drought to flood, we saw extreme weather events of every type. And last year, as you can see in the bar chart, topped a trend line that started a long time ago, but is likely to continue up and to the right as more disaster events affect more communities more frequently and more severely each year. Many of you have already read forecasts for a very active Atlantic hurricane season this year, and only time will tell. In the second slide, you can see that disaster affects some part of the country more heavily than others, but virtually no region is immune from risk. This has implications for the ways we work and the ways that we live. Suffice to say, there are a lot of opportunities for all of us to think and act more resiliently. And it might go without saying to such a sophisticated audience as this one, but we know that our businesses and our community organizations cannot be truly resilient unless the communities that they serve and operate in are prepared and resilient as well. So today we're going to have an opportunity to hear a lot more from some really impressive industry leaders about the investments they're making in resilience and sustainability, in better understanding and accounting for disaster risks and impacts to their businesses. We'll hear some successes and some challenges, and importantly, we'll save time for some Q&A at the end. So get your questions together as the discussion proceeds and submit those to the chat, please. Our hope is that the experience of the panelists and the investments that Microsoft, Walmart, and AT&T are making can help our audience better navigate your own paths to resilience and sustainability in the face of more frequent and severe climate threats that are affecting our communities and businesses each day. With that little setup, I'm really excited to introduce today's panelists. So I'm joined by Jessica Falante Farrington, who is a director for AT&T's Global and Environmental Sustainability Group. Don Park, who is a climate risk and resilience lead for Microsoft. And Lee Seiler, who's a director for emergency preparedness and strategy in Walmart's Global Emergency Management Group. I, of course, am your humble moderator, Reese May, and I'm excited to dive into the discussion here. This first one is going to be for everybody, and I'll kind of go in order here: Jess, Don, then Lee. I'm interested in what your companies are doing to build climate resilience, how you're assessing it, what actions are you taking? Jessica, clue us in.
Absolutely. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And Reese, it's always good to talk with you. I want to start off by defining what does a resilient company look like? And one, that entails thinking long-term, right? But secondly, it's integrating climate change into decision-making today so that you can mitigate challenges to your operations that you may face now or you may face 30 years into the future, right? So how do we do that? One is internal buy-in, and I mean at the top. Senior business unit leaders have to buy into the premise that climate resilience is linked to company strategy, right? And the success of that strategy. So let's talk about what that looks like for AT&T, right? If we're going to be the best broadband provider, if we're going to connect people better than anyone else, we have to have a climate resilient network that can withstand extreme weather impacts, right? So the second piece, you have to target a group internally that is thinking long term, because resilience inherently, it's not short-term preparation, it's not thinking 3 years out, it is thinking decades out, right? And making changes to infrastructure now. So for us, we found a friend in our network resiliency group that was thinking about how do we ensure that our wireline and mobility operations were hardened for climate impacts. And then we have to use a simple argument, and that argument is better data makes for better decisions, right? So that better data for us was climate data, not just looking historically at what hurricanes or wildfires had impacted us in the past. And just as you wouldn't roll out a new product without looking at future trends, right, and what consumers want, the same thing is true for this, in that, you know, we can't make plans about where to put generators, where to put floodgates without looking at future trend data. And that's what our climate data brings. And then finally, being a climate resilient company isn't enough. You have to think about the communities that you reside in, the communities that your employees reside in, and how you can work with those communities to empower them with the same tools that you're using internally to become more resilient as well.
Really love that, Jessica. Internal buy-in, data, and a focus on input from the community. Don, talk about from that, beyond that triumvirate, what do you see missing there, or how's Microsoft working to understand and address threats in communities?
Yeah, I believe Jessica has put down a very good kind of description of like, and the idea behind principles behind like, how do we approach this as a, as one of those wicked problems? And I think she has really approached it from a very good and clear direction. I think one interesting part that might be unique for us, or not unique per se, but like that has been a learning journey for us, is that we are recognizing that historically we've been looking at climate-related hazards as more like a univariate, like a single event-based approach, when in reality it does impact all of our infrastructure in kind of like in multiple directions. It's more like how much stress gets applied to the system rather than how does one single event impact the whole system. So one thing that we have started working on has been looking at how does these climate-related physical hazards impact our entire system. from various stress points, because it's not going to be, it's the hypothesis currently is that it's going to be multiple stress events that impacts the entire system. So it's really not only working with what are the specific external stressors, but how does the organization as a whole, like talking and collaborating with our stakeholders, really come together to understand like and kind of tabletop exercise some of these impacts, and how do we react and operate under it.
A really great point. To the extent that you're able to anticipate where stresses are going to show up in your systems, that makes great sense. You're able to sort of plan and absorb those a little more naturally. Lee, it's great to see you and always good to catch up. Talk about how Walmart's preparing for a world where we're seeing more frequent and severe events. I mean, the globe's biggest retailer. How do you all think about this?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you, Reese. Pleasure being on this panel with such great folks focused on this such an important topic. As you said, we're a retailer with operations in more than 24 countries and sourcing that spans the globe. So the way that we think about this is multidimensional. As we think about the different areas of the business of what we need to do in order to be able to serve our customers and our members on a day in and day out basis, and all of the impacts that it has associated with it. I'm lucky to work in our emergency management area, and so we're focused on the normal things that we would be doing in terms of preparedness of our associates and our customers and members. It all starts at home. So how do we make sure that our associates are resilient and they're able to come back to work? They're able to get back to a sense of normalcy. And then when it comes to communities being able to recover, they need to be able to get back to a sense of normalcy as well. As a largest retailer, largest pharmacy, largest fuel provider, being able to get our stores and clubs up and running as quickly as possible allows those communities to start that recovery process that much faster. As we think about the future, we think more about the omni-channel model and not just the brick and mortar. COVID taught us a lot of things of being able to meet the customer where they're at, and what do disasters and resiliency, how does that impact how we're being able to serve those customers. Today we can do things that we weren't able to do 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you had to go into the box in order to be able to get the things that you needed. Now you can use your cell phone, utilizing data and technology to place orders that's either delivered to your house, or you can just pull up into the parking lot and someone will bring it out to you. So we're thinking about other ways that we're able to serve the customer, whether that's groceries, life-saving, life-sustaining items, consumables, or even pharmacy type products. So those are the ways that we're thinking about it.
That's really helpful, Lee, and all of you, really. I want to shift gears a little from that general overview and talk a little more about data and technology. We've got a leader in global telecommunications here, the world's most valuable company, the globe's biggest retailer. Few have invested more in technological capability than these companies, and I wonder, how are you using tech and data internally to assess your gaps? And we'll go around here. Maybe Don, we can start with you, then go Lee and Jessica. And sort of a backup, you could answer either how you're using it, or maybe a gap that you have, data you wish you knew more about that you don't quite have now, or holes you wish you could plug in what you're able to understand about your own resilience or sustainability issues. So a couple of questions there. How are you using data and technology, and are there any gaps that you wish you could fill? Don, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So Microsoft, we have invested in kind of like cloud-based like data availability platform known as our planetary computer. And that has kind of helped us build out, helped us basically access this entire like data infrastructure that is kind of like initially started out as like a catalog of a bunch of various hazard and risk data, but also now has transitioned into continue to be kind of like this platform for additional like solutions and applications and dashboards on top of it. And this has continued to grow with our collaboration across various partners and organizations that we work with, who have then, like, for example, like Esri, who has helped us kind of communicate some of this information in a much in an effective way. On top of that data, we have continued to work with kind of like the large global climate models, work with, continue to consume large global climate models to then understand like what is the overall global exposure, as I'm sure many of us have already done. However, one big data gap that I will say is that every use case is very unique, and all data has kind of like their own kind of cuts and assumptions built into it that we all, as professionals and experts, need to fully understand before we consume it in the right way. So saying that while it's always an educational component that we can always continue to learn and how do we most effectively use this information, it's also about how can we best communicate it to make sure that we don't have opportunities for maladaptation, and how can we most effectively use the resources available to us to make that lasting impact.
Appreciate that, Don. Lee, anything you'd add on that, how Walmart's using data and technology?
I think Don hit the nail on the head. I love how he's thinking about it. One area that, I mean, there's so much information out there now. A lot of it comes down to how you're able to take all that information in, how you're able to consolidate it, how you're able to make it actionable, and then be able to share it back out. And so that's when it comes to data and AI, that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to, and the impact that AI can have on this particular area is being able to digest the tremendous amount of information that's out there and make it into something that we can distill and be able to take action steps against. The other thing about technology is we're such a large company. Is how do we use that to better collaborate with one another? So communicating back and forth, it's been through email, it's been through phone calls, it's been through text messages, and we'll continue to do it that way. But how are the other ways that we're able to pull that information together into a single pane of glass or a single point of truth where we're all able to work off of the same board with the same information, and we've got real-time information that's constantly coming in, and we're able to digest that and be able to make better decisions faster in order to be able to not only be better prepared, but also prepare those that are out in the field that will be facing some of these things at a moment's notice sometimes.
I'm really, Jessica, I want to hear from you on this too, but I also want to share a perspective. It seems I work in the disaster recovery and resilience space, and it seems like we're in the golden age of information. We've never known more about different kinds of risks and different kinds of perils in more parts of our country. We've never known more than ever before. And at the same time, we see exits of insurers from various marketplaces. Affordability is not there. Fewer people are insured in the National Flood Insurance Program than ever before. And so it is a wicked problem. I forget whether it was Don or Lee who said it. But as we learn more about risk, we seem to be doing the worst job of protecting ourselves against it. And so I'm really encouraged by the optimism I hear, Lee, from you and Don about the current technological trends and the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence to help us better understand and hopefully create markets where insurers see opportunities to underwrite more risk and opportunities to generate more profits for shareholders instead of running away from that risk and leaving even more communities exposed to perils that, again, we have enough data and technology and information to know pretty certainly the kinds of perils that groups are facing. So thankful for that optimism. Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about data and technology? AT&T's Climber tool is super cool, but I wonder if there's anything else that that stands out for you.
Yeah, and so echoing everything that everyone else said, I think, to your point, Reese, there's a lot of data out there, but you need the right data, right? And for AT&T, we needed granular, actionable data to make decisions about our infrastructure. And we know communities need this as well, right? So we made a significant investment in forward-looking data. We work with Argonne National Laboratory, commissioned them to produce a data set that spans a couple of different hazards. It looks at wind, it looks at drought, wildfire, flooding as well. And then we're able to apply these things internally, and we made investments in actually automating processes that integrate this data into decision making. And I think that was a really helpful strategy to ensure that it was actually used. But as you mentioned, the other investment that we've made, and this is alongside FEMA and Argonne National Laboratory, we debuted a resource called the Climate Risk and Resilience Portal, or CLIMER for short. And that takes the actionable data that we've been using and makes it public for any municipality, policymaker, any utility or other company to look on there, look up your address or look up locations of strategic assets and better understand your own vulnerabilities, which in turn, information is only as important as what you do with it, right? So you have to have it guide investment and help you prioritize. You know, we can't afford, both on the corporate side and on the municipal side, none of us can afford to harden everything, right? So we have to be thoughtful about where we spend our money. And so this is both, you know, on our end of things, it's helped us to prioritize capital investments. And then for the municipalities that we've worked with, they too, you know, have found this helpful to key in on neighborhoods that are really going to need to focus on, you know, ramping up the amount of air conditioners that they have because of how extreme heat is going to impact vulnerable citizens who may be lower income. So, you know, I think data not only on the hazards, but data on demography or demographics, thinking about how do we help those who are most socially vulnerable adapt.
That's really helpful, Jessica. And, you know, I'm looking at a couple of questions here. One about like challenges that come with major projects, but then a second about what are the good arguments for making the investment in the first place. And I'd like to reverse them, because you were talking there about, you began at the beginning, you said a little more there about, you know, the kinds of arguments you need to make in order to get people to see the return on a resilience investment in the short, medium, and long term. What have you found to be the most compelling arguments in making that case? And then I also want to hear from Lee and Don, because I imagine retail and data and computation sort of look and consider that a little bit differently. So maybe talk about what AT&T, what it took to get that kind of senior buy-in or make that culture shift to begin with.
Absolutely. For this kind of work, you have to build a business case, right? And you know, the sweet spot for any corporate responsibility initiative is one that has business value and social impact, right? So resilience, of course, has both. So the first thing we did was to look at the financials. You know, how do storms, wildfires, wind, et cetera, affect your company today? Quantify that. And then, and you know, we worked with a third party to do this, but you can do this in-house. You have to map forward of how are those costs changing over time due to accelerating climate impacts. So then once you get a number, that helps you to first talk about why this is an urgent issue. But the other piece is to look at the cost savings of being proactive, right? You know, how can you quantify that by making an investment now in a floodgate, making an investment now in a generator that will enable an office to run even if the power provider goes out, right? How will that over time save money in disaster recovery costs, in terms of customer impacts? So, you know, you have to define both, you know, the costs now, the cost later, and the cost saved. But the last piece is about the purpose, which you can't discount. And, you know, resilience is so important. And when this again gets to the heart of what all of our companies do, right? We want to serve our customers. We want to ensure they have positive experiences with our products and services. And so, you know, we need to be resilient to be able to serve our mission and for them to have a positive experience. So all of those things help to build the business case.
That's really helpful, Jessica. And when you think about building the business case, I'm often trying to convince a mayor or a county executive to take some discretionary budget and spend it on a resilience project when they might need to, spend it on a new, on a new fire engine or face a more immediate. So practically applicable examples, I think, that work in local communities are always really, really helpful. Don, talk about what it's taken to get investments made at Microsoft, or what you all look at when you're making that business case. I think about my world, and our friends at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I think just in the last couple of days, have produced a report that says you get $13 in return for every dollar spent on resilience. You'd have to spend $13 to get similar impacts after disaster. For me, that's a strong business case from a pretty objective third party that I know a lot of people are going to listen to. When you're getting ready to make your case at Microsoft, Don, what sources of information are you pulling from? What are managers and executives looking for as they make these kinds of investments?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. No, I think for us, it has been very effective when we talk about like how like all of these external climate related hazards are a direct kind of can potentially be disruptive to everyone's business operations. So it's really driving that narrative. Like, how do you like showing this kind of like the storyline of not like too extreme, but like the plausible impacts and how like what's the rationale for like, look, like, you invest in some of these solutions. You then build an understanding of what that delta looks like. And then building out like what are the potential cost savings associated with making those investments and decisions. And so it is kind of, and it's also partially built into how do you align incentives? Like, how do you build the arguments that everyone sees it from like, not just as, oh, like someone saying, hey, like, you have to factor this in. It's like building up that understanding and rationale to then say, hey, this is why we find this important. This is the value that we may have on your own business and on your own kind of operations. And this is what we think will work together to then build that collaborative approach. And of course, as always, factoring in like what is the additional benefit that we can do for the local community and how we can build all these kind of like, I guess, opportunities where everyone wins and everyone benefits from a really successful solution.
That focus on collaboration, Don, I really appreciate it. And I apologize for a little bit of technical difficulties. My network seems strained. So if I disappear from video, know that I'm there on the audio. And I think that approach to collaboration is useful and surely strengthens any sort of investment case that you want to make when you have multiple business leaders, verticals, departments who are leaning in that direction or who can see the value that's going to be added. That makes great sense. How about you, Lee? Emergency management and preparedness. I know Walmart takes it seriously. It's part of the corporate legacy. There's a long and proud history in New Orleans and a ton of other communities. What do people think about when they think about making these investments at Walmart?
Again, I want to echo what Don and Jessica said. Our journey in this really started well back in the early 2000s, right around Hurricane Katrina, and our then CEO Lee Scott saw our response and the needs and the impacts that Hurricane Katrina had on New Orleans. And the year before that, Florida got hit by four major hurricanes as well. So seeing the impact that has on those communities really changed his mindset to say, we at Walmart, we have a responsibility in this. We're going to take ownership for what we can take ownership for and change what we can change, and we can do well and we can do good at the same time. And so that really shifted the mindset for a lot of different areas within the business. Global sourcing was already out looking at what does resiliency look like, because as we're sourcing products such as fruits and vegetables across the globe, climate change is impacting that and the growing season and the availability of some of those types of things. But they were out doing that in a silo. We created our sustainability department to really focus in on what are the things for sustainability so that we can make sure that we're recycling plastics and we're part of the solution on some of those things. Reduce the amount of packaging that is being used within the stores, and so from there it really began to grow, and people started looking within their own business to say, how can we become more resilient as a company? How can we become more sustainable as a company, and the impacts that has on resiliency? From a Walmart Foundation perspective, they started taking a look at not only disaster response, but what can they do in terms of grants that we can provide, and what other programs can we come alongside to better support, such as the BRIC program. We've provided a grant to 4 organizations, including SBP, to do work in the Gulf, to really take a look at things from a different perspective, and see how we can improve resiliency in some of those areas that often are more disproportionately impacted. So that's how we started thinking about it. Comes down to really the impact that we can have, the strengths that we can bring to the table, and then what's the return on investment to make sure that we're investing in the right places, whether it be time or money, in order to have that long-term impact that we're looking to have.
Well, thank you, Lee, and also thank you for the shout out. And I would note that Walmart's investment is helping drive an investment of human capacity in some small to medium-sized rural communities with worthy resilience projects, but who lack the ability to apply for some of these federal subsidies, like the BRIC program that Lee mentioned. And Jessica, you'll be thrilled to know that those fellows are working with municipal partners to implement Climber, and see how that technology might be able to help them understand gaps. And with that in mind, Don, we should probably catch up after this and figure out how Microsoft can be working with SVP. But let me change gears just a second. These are all really exciting and positive developments. I want to do the thing that I like to do as a Marine and a marathoner. I want to talk about some hard stuff. I want to talk about something that didn't go the way you planned, some sort of unexpected challenge where you learn something. What you're talking about implementing, whether building new technology or taking a fresh look at the way your businesses interact with vendors and communities, these are big projects, and big projects rarely proceed without running into challenges. So I wonder if any challenge jumps to mind in the last couple of years as you've been working these programs, making these investments. What's a novel thing you learned or a challenge you didn't expect to have to overcome? And maybe here we could go Don, Jessica, Lee.
Yeah, great question. And I think we can all agree that we operate in an area that requires a lot of technical knowledge, but we have to communicate it and work with non-technical individuals. And when it comes to trying to work with like stakeholders, and not like everyone has their own incentives and like kind of thought process of what they understand, but when they don't fully understand something, the immediate response might be very well, I guess a lot of pushback to an extent. And it's not like, because they're not about resilience, it's just that they just don't fully understand or capture or see it from the direction that we do. And so it's definitely it has been a learning journey, I guess, to really understand, like, communicate, not just like, hey, this is what we're thinking, but also recognize that they like our counterparts and our other, the other people that we work with, that we collaborate, have their own understanding of this. And how can we use this as an educational opportunity for not just for us to share what we're thinking about, for us to understand, hey, what drives you? Hey, what brings you to the table? And how can we build these conversations out? And so historically, there has been, let's say, certain recommendations or ideas that we might have come up with that, like, on the ground, they're like, okay, so it doesn't really we don't see that as being a proper solution. And it fostered a better collaboration and further conversations to then drive and understand what actually is going on the ground, and then adjusting our own thought process to see how can we make it so all of our solutions kind of work together.
I love that. So you frame the issue up to try and create more of a common operating picture so that all of the stakeholders
Correct.
Involved here are sort of seeing and trying to solve the same problem. That makes a lot of sense. Lee, any reflections from you on this one, challenges you ran into, things you learned?
To me, it comes down to leading with influence. So when you're talking about resilience and preparedness, oftentimes you hear, what's that investment going to bring back to me? How is that going to make us better? How is that going to help us sell items or serve our customers, or take care of our associates? And that's why I love some of the information, the chamber releasing that report. That's huge in being able to monetize monetize that, put a financial number and to that, so that you're able to show the impacts that it could have. Because oftentimes what I've run into is when you're talking resilience, you get that pushback of, well, how do you know that something's going to happen there again? What makes you think that by doing that we're going to see this? And letting them know the long-term view of some of those things. It may not happen next year, but but statistically it's going to happen there again. A flood's going to happen in Florida sometime. It may not happen tomorrow, but the investment that we make in that area will have its long-term impacts, and being able to educate and influence them to see the longer term horizon on what those investments look like going forward is one of the pieces. And getting that that high level cheerleader, that one person that's higher up in the organization that's willing to talk internal to the organization, external to other organizations. When we rolled out sustainability and changes of packaging that we were trying to do, we had to go to all of our suppliers to do that. And so that took leadership, their ranks, to be able to go out to those suppliers and say, here's why we're doing it, and here's why it's important to us, and here's why it's should be important to you, and the impact that it can have, and asking those people to come alongside us in that journey.
That's a really important one. And Jessica, answer any question you like, but I am interested in everybody's take on expanding the aperture for resilience, right? Beyond the core function of the business and to those supply chain, the supply chain value adders, your vendors, your customers, the communities where your physical assets are located. Maybe talk about that a little bit. How do you engage with communities? Why is that so important? I know, obviously, but I think our audience will love it.
Yeah. So I think to answer both questions, I think, a challenge that we've faced is, okay, we have this fantastic data set. We have these tools that you can use to analyze the data. But how do you change behavior to get people to actually use them, whether on the community side or internally at your company, right? And the number one lesson that we've learned is to meet people where they're at. So whether you're talking about the community, your suppliers, whomever, you have to start with, okay, what is your BAU process? What tools are you using to do your job today? And then how can we think about innovative ways to integrate climate data or whatever you want them to do differently into that BAU process. So for us, internally, our mobility planners who are thinking about where do we put equipment, perhaps on the roof of a Walmart or on, other buildings or whatever. When you think about that planning process, we were thoughtful about integrating climate data and simplifying the climate data into these very basic risk scores, so that a planner could say, okay, for this location, this looks like a good candidate, because not only am I getting good reception here, is this a good place, just, will deliver a good service quality, but on top of that, we're mitigating climate risk. And I know that because this score, I didn't have to go anywhere else to look for it. It was already in front of me, and I can make a decision based on that. And, on the community side, and it's a little bit similar on the supplier end of things, but what we realized was debuting the climate risk and resilience portal wasn't necessarily enough to drive changes in user behavior. So we were really thoughtful about targeting emergency management professionals and saying, okay, how can we do proactive webinars, right? And really coach people through using our tool. But then we went a step further than that, and in the state of Idaho, and now in New York and in Kentucky, we're working with communities to say, okay, you know what? We're going to do the vulnerability analysis for you. We're going to, in conjunction with a third party, we're going to look at what issues are most important to you. Extreme heat is coming up a lot. And then how do we look at what neighborhoods, what communities are most vulnerable? And then the final step of what do you do to mitigate those risks? Is it tree planting? Is it cooling shelters? Is it, flood mitigation, expanding the capacity of your drainage systems, right? How do we really coach on how to use the data to really, at the end of the day, mitigate risk? So I think by pinpointing, okay, put this out there, but why isn't it getting used? Seeking to address that gap is how we overcame that.
I love the focus on behavior change, because that's really all the information in the world. It doesn't really matter if we can't get people to make the behavior change. And I wonder, Lee, in the same way, when we're thinking about, maybe as an example, what's your mandate inside your job description, emergency preparedness? And are you charged with thinking about communities? Are you charged with just thinking about the business? Do you think about all of the externalities? Maybe talk a little about how the company encourages you to think in order to be proficient at your job. What's the scope of your?
My mandate is to make Walmart the safest place to work and shop in the world. And so for me to think of it in that way, I've got to be thinking about associates, I've got to be thinking about customers, and thinking about communities, and how can I have impact in each one of those areas. Some of them I have direct work with the associates on a personal level, but also on a professional level as well. Because I want them to be better prepared so that they can get themselves and their families out of harm's way and be able to come home and get back to a sense of normalcy as quickly as possible, with the least amount of impact. Then when we think about that professionally, how can they do the exact same thing in their job? How do they take care of the store? How do they take care of the customer? And have all the processes and procedures in place in order to be able to do that, and be able to get the store club back up and running as quickly as possible, or open the distribution center as quickly as possible during an event, whatever that event may be. And events have changed so much, from natural to now man-made, being much more impactful in the work that we're responding to. And then how do I work with the Walmart Foundation and other parts of the business to see what we can do within those local communities, so that we can provide information that we're putting together, we're pulling together to provide to our associates. How do we get that out to the customers as well? And then how do we get that out to the communities, so that they're hearing some of the same things that they may be hearing from FEMA.gov or Ready.gov. They're also hearing the same types of things from us, and it becomes a reinforcement of they hear it in multiple areas.
Yeah, and I've been to the EOC there in Bentonville. It's really impressive. I think the Department of Transportation may rely on Walmart for whether roads are open, because they have more current information. Thinking about communities, Don, demand for Microsoft products and capabilities must be, just at an all-time high now. With the power to compute and compile and analyze that you have, how does Microsoft think about that in terms of communities? What obligations do you feel to the communities where you're doing business, where your customers are literally everywhere? So how do you think about the community aspect at Microsoft?
Great question. So at Microsoft, we coordinate with a lot of local leaders and our localized kind of presence. And we reach out to local communities, maybe to also local organizations, to then see where are the needs, how can we support, how can we help out. And from there, we establish our own kind of engagements with the local communities. And that also means that at the end of the day, a business is a collection of people. And we have to make sure that people and the communities that we service are functional and everyone's happy, to then make sure that we are able to operate in the way that we need to. And especially as Microsoft products are very much sometimes the backbones of a lot of these solutions, especially our cloud service offerings. It's important to make sure that these type of solutions remain active and available so that they can service the demand that they need to. So it has been kind of like a multifaceted approach where like not only do we work with like within our own business resiliency to enable local communities to have access to this information, but also how can we work with the localized kind of leaders and organizations to then continue fostering these engagements and to build a community resilience opportunity in addition to our own business opportunities.
I really love that, Don. And I think often about every community is different, but the way communities are comprised, it's really the same. The forces that govern them are larger and smaller. Some places are business towns and others are run by politics more. And when you think about resilience in America, or when I think about it, it is truly the art of what's possible here. Not what we can think up in the Beltway or in a state capital, but what we could get people to get behind here in this community. And so I am really encouraged to hear Microsoft thinking about how they can both understand and then start to enable or empower local leaders to make the kinds of resilience and decisions that unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you view it, you can't make those from Washington, D.C. on high. And all the subsidies in the world won't matter if local leaders don't see and understand data that drives them to make better decisions and change behavior. So I realize we're getting a little bit close to time to switch to Q&A here. So before we do that, I want to sort of read back what I've heard in this discussion and then give each of you or any of you an opportunity to build on it. You know, a lot of folks joined the call today thinking about how they can inspire change in their organization or start to lead in deliberate ways toward a more resilient and sustainable future. I've heard from you all that aligning those kinds of resilience and sustainability outcomes with corporate values is essential. I've heard that building a strong data-driven business case for why these kinds of investments are important is a second critical key. And I've heard that appropriate championing or cheerleading from leaders in the right positions is a third really key component. When you reflect on the last few years or your entire careers of experience, what else is important to make a change happen? You get a business case for it, it's aligned with your corporate values, you've got a leader who's celebrating it. What are you missing? What makes the best sauce there?
I think effective storytelling, right? You know, so you hit on everything in terms of what you need to do to get to do the work, right? But then you have to tell a great story about the work and celebrate arm in arm with communities about the work that you're able to do together. Because, you know, climate change can be a hard issue to wake up in the morning and work on. I think as adaptation professionals, everybody on this call is like, every day we see new news stories that are more and more frightening, you know, but I think celebrating those positive stories and SBP has so many about communities that have recovered, communities that are now actually, you know, more livable and more, you know, wonderful to live in because the community had input on how they were rebuilt and the community had input on what was important to them, you know, more parks, more green spaces, right? So I think celebrating the work and just focusing on some of the positives is really important.
Storytelling is crucial. Lee, Don, anything you'd add to that?
The only thing that I would add is how do we bring others along with us? So how do we work collectively? The work that we're doing is very similar. It's in the same realm. It may not be similar, but the work that Jessica is doing and the work that Don is doing, we can take that information and be able to improve our work. And the same thing in reverse. We're not in this alone. We can't be in this alone. It's going to take all of us working together in order to be able to do it. And being able to share that and find that network to be able to bounce information off of or thoughts off of, like we are on this call. It takes all of us working together in order to be able to have that impact that we're looking for.
Don, besides infinite resources, what else would you need in order to get that done?
Yeah, no, I think everything covered and highlighted here is very much really resonates and echoes kind of like the message that I'd like to send. But I think another component would be like bringing a lot of humility to the table and recognizing that like it's a collaborative effort with many people that we need buy-ins from, that we need to work with, and how it's always going to be a conversation, and that sometimes like a bit of humility really helps kind of us communicate and also understand what's really going on the ground. It's very easy for us to think of like high level kind of ideas and then try to implement on the ground, only to realize that there is a reason why some of these things might need a bit more nuance. So it's been, yeah, so I would definitely say humility.
What do they say? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I really appreciate these reflections, and without further ado, I'm looking now at my second screen, and I see there are a lot of fantastic questions. We probably should have started with questions from the audience. These look so good. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them, but we do have a pretty good amount of time here. So I'm just going to dig in. If one of you feels like jumping in first, please do. You seem like a respectful lot, so I imagine you won't be stepping on each other too much. When you're thinking about the needs for increasing resilience at your companies, are there particular skills, so this is a capacity question, are there particular skills that you're looking for in the job market to grow these capacities? You know, Lee, Don, Jessica, as your teams are expanding, what are your companies looking for to round out your view of risk, resilience, preparedness, sustainability, et cetera? Anyone feel free to jump in here. Or I will call on you if someone else.
I'm happy to jump in.
Thanks, Jeff.
I think climate literacy, is something that, FEMA has called out, and something that, we have sought to help with, right? Just educating what is happening, what's changing, how are hazards, being affected by climate change. So I think something we've sought to do internally, and we have a group called Environmental Champions, right? So we look to take employees who are really interested in this topic and educate them about the work that we're doing and how they in turn can carry the work forward. So, just having that background and terms, it can be pretty overwhelming and it can be wonky, right? So addressing that up front, I think, is a skill that, climate is just going to be woven into everybody's job, really. So we have to train up on some of those fundamentals.
The universality is important, and I think speaks to part of what I was saying earlier. If resilience doesn't become a local issue, then it doesn't matter much. It's a national issue. If you don't have it in the mind of every employee, it doesn't matter much. You have it in the mind of a few people in the senior staff. So that makes good sense. I got one here about uncertainty, and I think it's really a question about continuous learning. These products are new. They're rapidly developing. Our ability to know things is changing every second. The certainty with which we know them seems sometimes also to be changing. How do you build uncertainty into your organizational learning process so people are using these tools, but they understand they've got to continue to learn? Change is going to come rapidly. Maybe talk about the learning process or how you structure continuous learning in your own organizations. And Lee, let's start with you here.
That's a great question, and I would say that's something that we're looking into, to how do we continually improve how we're communicating to our associates, how we're getting this information out, how are we making it relevant to them, and like you said, it's local. So how do you get that local information to in the United States? We've got 1.4 million associates. That's just the United States. That's not global. So how do you make that local for them, and to be able to tell that story to engage them in that? We can certainly talk about what we're doing as a company, but relating it down to them on their block is that thing. The other piece kind of goes back to the previous question. Is a technologist, getting someone to be able to digest that information that's coming in and making it relevant and seeing how you can tie it into your strategy is a gap, that because there's so much information coming, there's so much exciting activity in this area now that used to not be there. So just being able to keep up with it is the other component of what we're looking for.
Yeah, you guys kind of can't help it. The incident management system at Walmart, your ability to know what's going on with store outages and communicate it rapidly to others or correlate it to wider events in the world. It's really, I don't want to give away the secret sauce there in Bentonville, but I think Walmart's abilities are pretty spectacular there. I'm going to switch gears on you, Don, and I'm asking for a friend. I swear, this is a question that came in the chat. This is not SVP. What do your companies look for in partners, local or national? This is a question about how organizations come to partner with Microsoft, AT&T, Walmart. How do you all look out in the world for opportunities that are interesting and business aligned? Is it like executive championed? Is it values aligned? Maybe talk about that process a little bit for some potential partners on the call.
Great question. I'm thinking, I believe it's a combination of like, how can we most utilize impact, or how can we most mobilize impact? And the impact can kind of be defined across various kind of perspectives. And I think the part that has most resonated, or at least I've seen has been most resonated, is how can we be most effective with how we impact, let's say, water availability, water access, maybe even like disaster prevention or mitigation, to then like, I guess per investment, per unit cost of investment. And so it's having that conversation, really understanding like, how can we be most effective with the resource that we have available? And then how can we then get executive buy-in to support these type of initiatives and solutions? And I think also at the end of the day, it's just transparency. Like, as much as we would really like, like we really need transparency to really understand like, how is this being used effectively, and also what is the data that we're using in order to make these decisions? Because data, it can be inherently biased, especially with the methods that we approach and use. And yes, as the science continues to mature and continues to grow, we'll find new insights and different perspectives, but it's always been, as long as we're able to communicate everything effectively and transparently and come to a universal understanding, I think that is going to be very effective to finding great collaborative partners.
Really appreciate that, Don. I have one here about the circular economy, or the idea that a company is responsible for the entire life cycle of the things they sell. Do any of you want to talk a little bit about how your organizations have thought about that? Lee, I imagine it's most obviously relevant for you, but I'd be interested in whether Microsoft is helping customers think through that, and Jessica, your perspective from AT&T as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in here first. And where it comes to that, a lot of that's going to be our sourcing team and our merchants, and how they're looking at that, and what can we do, what can we control, or what do we have a hand in influencing on what that direction looks like. When we think about packaging and that work, combined with our sustainability work, those two teams coming together and saying, hey, there's an opportunity for us to be able to work together here, so that we're using plastics that can be 100% recycled. We're using the things, or we're changing the things that we have influence over, that aren't too hard to do. It's low hanging. Some of it's low hanging fruit on being able to look at things through a different glass and seeing how we're able to have that influence on that. That's not available everywhere, but it's certainly available in many areas. And really working with each one of the departments and empowering them to think that way allows them to start having those conversations, with their internally, as well as with the suppliers, to say, hey, how can we do this differently, that it has a smaller footprint on the environment or the world as we know it today.
It's a great, SVP is a Toyota production system. We're a proselytizer, a dedicated follower, and in that system, the notion is that the best ideas often come from the shop room floor. And so distributing the opportunity for people to look at their businesses and their products and think about how they can reduce the footprint of that seems consistent with the globe's largest retailer, the kind of strategy you need to really get after this stuff. So Lee, I appreciate that. Jess, anything you would add here about AT&T's view of it?
Yeah, I think, one of the many challenges that my colleagues who focus on this issue face, how do you get people to take those phones that are sitting in drawers in their desk and that they don't use anymore and send them back so that we can repurpose the raw materials, right? So, we're constantly thinking of new and innovative ways to do that. And one of the neat programs that one of my colleagues ran in partnership with some of our retail stores is thinking about how we can encourage customers to bring their old technology into stores, and then we can repurpose those to actually help with our other signature issues. So climate change is, of course, one of the critical issues that we face, but the other one is bridging the digital divide and making sure that students and families are connected. So how can we take people's old laptops and give those to school districts where students need to be able to go home and be able to do their homework and do it on a device? So I think there are some really interesting opportunities to harness innovation and thinking about both how to reduce the environmental impact of our products and services, but then also how to repurpose them for good and to solve other pain points that communities have.
Really helpful, Jess. Thank you. Maybe this is a kind of tee up for Don. So everybody say Microsoft, but could you each of you talk about some emerging technologies that your business is considering to improve your climate resilient strategy? What are you working with? I guess, Lee, anything you can share other than Don's incredible AI tools?
Well, so thank you for mentioning that. We have recently published our kind of like sustainability playbook with a sustainability AI playbook. And that kind of talks more about like how can artificial intelligence and machine learning methodologies be employed to either really understand and think through like how can we help sustainability problems. And so we look at it across like kind of 3 game-changing abilities about how we can measure and predict and optimize complex systems as we all work and operate within a complex system, but then also how it can accelerate potential development of sustainability solutions and kind of empower kind of our own workforce. Like we mentioned earlier about how there is how do we manage with like expertise and and knowledge. It's we can use AI simply as tools to then enable people to help like communicate or understand much more complex problems. So those are kind of like the various opportunities that we've seen here and that we employ and that we have started to employ as well. Microsoft.
So for us, I'm going to plug Dawn because one of the things that we're working on is how do we better collaborate with one another, both and externally. So one of the questions that we're asking right now is how do we better utilize Teams and SharePoint and those systems that we use on a regular everyday basis and squeeze more out of them, because we know that there's a tremendous amount of functionality built into those that either we're not using, we're not taking advantage of, or that we can take additional advantage of. So that's one of the areas that we're looking at of how do we better systems that we currently use right now. Thing in terms of technology that we're looking at is with all these different streams of information and all these APIs that are available out there through all these different systems, how do we develop a dashboard that pulls all that together for us? And so and to be able to get, again, I talked about it a little bit earlier, that single pane of glass that we're able to take a look at and have a level of confidence in that, so that things are being monitored, they're being read, they're fed into one area, and we have a level of confidence that we're able to work from. And so that's the other technology piece that we're thinking about, of being able to pull those different streams together and make it actionable for us to be able to use on a moment's notice.
Sounds like we've got some good fostering good business conversations right here during the panel. Jess, I thought I'd seen you reach for your microphone just before, and I want to make sure I don't miss an opportunity for you to contribute.
Yeah, I think you asked earlier about, how do you build uncertainty into your process? And I think, leveraging some newer technologies to help do that, you know, is certainly something we're looking at. And more specifically, you know, we're leveraging AI to help, you know, improve our flood projections, right? You know, how do we help that, or how do we integrate that into our modeling efforts? And then also, how do we leverage AI to improve our visibility of disaster costs and impacts to our infrastructure today? So I think there's a lot of ways to use, you know, changing technologies to help us all better manage this risk.
Love that, and really appreciate it. I'm looking here, strolling through a couple. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them, but I think we have time for a couple more. The cost of severe weather. Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Before you go on to the next question, the other thing that I wanted to bring up, since we're talking about technology and how we as private sector use that, is how can we, the private sector, help nonprofits and all the way down to the client. From my background, working with Red Cross and National VOAD and with nonprofit organizations that are doing case management, many of them are using, still to this day, paper and pencil. So a lot of the work that they're doing is very manual. It's slow. And so seeing what we do within the corporate realm and really making that available to the nonprofits and all the way down to the client of being able to apply for assistance or even know that assistance is available to them is something that would have a tremendous impact on those that we're talking about. And being able to help those communities recover that much faster, because that person that's been impacted, that person that doesn't have a home anymore, doesn't have electricity, and they've lost all the food in the refrigerator, being able to connect with those folks much more effectively and efficiently so that we're able to get them back on their feet that much faster.
That's a really great point. Connectivity to organizations that can serve individuals, but then the additional connectivity to the individuals that need to be served, and the kind of intermediating entities you sometimes need in nonprofit organizations. And to your great point, Lee, the sort of technological, not flat-footedness, but disparity they often find, disadvantage they often find themselves at. And I'll tell you, in my experience, it's not limited to the nonprofit organizations either. I will leave some government partners of ours unnamed, but I've met with state government agency officials that are leading programs responsible for helping more than 1,000 people that are operating on paper and pen and like old written files. And it's difficult to imagine how you'll be able to use that information to do any sort of analytical and future forecasting, resilience kind of thinking, let alone the fact that these 1,000 or more people are waiting on recovery services right now. And so I think the disparity in technological starting points across communities and across organizations and across the individuals who need services from those communities and those community organizations is stark. And I appreciate you slowing us down to draw some attention to that, Lee. We're talking a little about the investments that you all have made in communities, and there's been some stress around local budgets. Costs are rising rapidly from an inflationary standpoint, but also the costs of disaster impact, as we covered in those initial slides. You talk about the role you see, and I have some thoughts to share here too, but talk about the role you see for private capital, corporate philanthropy, customer donations to help offset these costs. What opportunities do you see to fund resilience and mitigation efforts in ways beyond more taxing and spending?
Yeah, resilience projects are expensive. We learned that when we first started to dabble in the area of philanthropy in terms of resilience. We work with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and it was pretty staggering to me to see the different phases of the project. Right, just the planning, phase is maybe $1 million, and then getting to the actual execution, again, another huge cost. And if you want to direct the funding to communities who are most impacted, often it's going to be even more because you have to pay for the project management of all that. And I think, Walmart or Lee, your model at Walmart is so great, investing in the capacity, of communities to do better planning and working with SPP to do that, to put a resource in the community to better understand, what are the needs, and then to seek grant money for that. So I think that's so smart. And I guess, what I would say, though, back to an earlier question on what are we looking for partners to have, we do want to better understand what is the return on that invested capital. And I think it's really, really hard. Emissions can be easier to measure, in terms of the mitigation factor. But, how do we do better at looking at not just inputs, into a program, but then looking at outputs and outcomes. How do we quantify how much more resilient a community is? And I think that goes back to, what we talked about before in terms of, if we're not leveraging technology, to understand the impact today, how can we then quantify the improvements? How do we have better visibility on, what damage is caused today? But I think that is a critical piece that on the corporate side, we're always going to have to answer to. What did your money do? How did this make Kentucky or, New York or wherever more resilient?
I appreciate that, Jessica. And I would also say, from SBP's perspective, Walmart, AT&T's investment in helping communities achieve a better baseline understanding of what their risk is and what they can do to invest in it. To me, SBP sees it as an opportunity to extend or expand the citizen participation process. When we put a fellow in a community like the Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Regional Council of Government in South Carolina, and we task them with identifying meaningful mitigation and resilience projects that can serve the 8 CEDARS designated census tracts in that area, we are extending the representation of low-income communities. We are giving them an opportunity to comment on projects that might affect their lives, projects that now won't be something that happened to them, but something that happened with them, with their input considered. And I think about, AT&T making the initial introduction to Mayor Hunter in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I think about Walmart's investment that allowed us to place a fellow there. I think about the fellow going out and talking to more than 200 area businesses to get input on the 450 units of affordable housing that's about to get built in that part of Lake Charles. And through that community input, we heard from local elderly residents that they sure would love a guarded lit crosswalk at this intersection between her community and the laundromat that many people in her community use. Cars can go through there 45 miles an hour the way it's zoned right now. And this was her only request. And it cost a bucket of paint to make that amendment to the plan. And there are a dozen more things like that we heard from community members just by going out and asking. It didn't materially change the plan. It gave everybody access to the future development that's about to happen here. And it gave people an opportunity to sort of celebrate this awesome success and new thing that's going to happen in our town that needs it, instead of everybody scratching their heads and wondering for a year or two, what are all these bulldozers doing here and what is it they're about to build? And so I think, AT&T and Walmart's investment, they provide that kind of opportunity for SBP to expand who gets some say in this and who gets to know about it and who gets to, sort of contribute to it. And so I take a moment to highlight that. I realize we're going to come to time here in just a minute, but Don, I wonder, this one's for you, and it's not a trick question, but you see it popping up a lot now. There are massive emissions problems with AI computing. How's Walmart starting to think about offsetting the emissions from this large-scale AI computing revolution that's happening right now? Are you thinking about it, and if so, how?
So from Microsoft, it is recognized. And I think one thing that's important is that computational efficiency from what I recall, computational efficiency has improved maybe or consumption has improved 9x, but our power increase has been around 10x over the last 10 years. And this is something that we've published through our AI sustainability playbook. And kind of like it is really important to understand like how can we apply the tools that AI brings? How can we best leverage the efficiencies that gets introduced with these type of tools to then enable those type of sustainability kind of opportunities? Because right now it's like we need to start like integrating more and more of these personal opinion has always been that we need to introduce more of these tools and solutions to enable these type of sustainability opportunities rather than just look at the issues associated to it, just look at that.
Yeah, I love that, Don. And I'm thinking earlier there, the question about opportunities for private capital and corporate philanthropy to kick in. I think we're at the very dawn of that. Of we're sort of late stage ESG. It seems like a new dawn on corporate and social responsibility thinking. And to the extent that companies start to think more locally or more extreme in local ways about the kind of impacts they can cause, I think the easier it'll be for Boeing and Volvo to see how those communities in Berkeley and Charleston and Dorchester County, South Carolina, live and die by the kinds of investments they make. And I think that we should expect, or at least I hope, that in the future we'll see capital projects that pencil in with contributions from major corporations that operate in the area. I don't know why we couldn't pave a road or build a bridge or decide that we want some area housing to be more resilient with any capital that's interested, whether it's consumer donations or corporate and philanthropic giving or just traditional investment that expects return. I think many are the paths, and as we continue to see subsidies introduced at the federal level and operated at the state level, there'll be ever more creative stacks of capital that come together to advance some of these projects. And I expect that we'll see and hear a lot more from Walmart and from AT&T and from Microsoft in the future on that stuff as well. I realize that we're coming almost to our time here. What I would like to do is just go around the horn here and give any of you an opportunity. You've been so forthcoming and you shared so generously today. Is there anything that you'd like to say to wrap up? Anything you'd like the audience to take away about you or your company's investment or commitment to these issues? And we'll go maybe Don, Lee, Jessica.
I think at the end of the day, as we're all very familiar with, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And not only that, it has to be a collaborative kind of approach where we are able to bring the right stakeholders, the right people, the right expertise to the table to really come to a unified approach to how we view these things. However, also, we really like to think of this as like a one-size-fits-all problem, but we all, of course, know that it's a localized, it's a global issue with localized solutions. So how can we all kind of work together to introduce and factor in these type of thinking and nuances to the problem, to the solutions that we're proposing to, and how can we all do it effectively as possible? So that was a lot of words, but yeah. Very much.
No, really terrific. Thank you, Don. Lee, what would you add to that?
I would say it's a continuous learning environment, and we're never going to stop learning. We're never going to stop innovating. There's not just one way of dealing with this. There are 100,000 million ways of being able to deal with this, and by having open lines of communication, by having conversation, by asking questions, by challenging the norm, I think is how we continue to improve and learn and get better at doing this. It's important work. We have to do it for the sake of the environment, for the sake of our kids, for the sake of our grandkids. We need to be doing this type of work, and we know that we can do it as long as we're all working together with a similar mission.
Jessica, last word yours.
100%. So I think what I wanted to flag is just how important the NGO community is in all of this. You know, I think we've talked a lot today about, you know, best practices that the corporate sector has to offer, but at the end of the day, AT&T has leaned heavily on nonprofits like SBP, but also we work closely with C2ES, which has done an incredible job convening corporations around this issue of, you know, how do we become more resilient? What are best practices? And just facilitate that conversation and establish a set of principles that they actually debuted this year about what best practice looks like. What are the principles we should all be adhering to? So I think, you know, just what I would recommend is just not only looking within the corporate sector, but also what are incredible NGOs like yours doing, and what can we fund, what can we learn, and what can we support.
Well, I couldn't ask for a better ending than that, Jessica. I am so thankful to this panel, and really to our friends at EcoAdapt for hosting us today, for you all panelists for donating or offering your very valuable time and sharing with us the benefits of your insight and your experience. Jessica, thanks again for that shameless plug for SBP. I'm Reese. If you would like to learn more about me or my organization, you can always get me at Reese, R-E-E-S-E, at sbpusa.org. You can find us at sbpusa.org. With that, I'm going to thank everyone again for attending, again to our panelists for your awesome contributions, to you, the audience, for spending a bit of time today, and to our friends Carrie and the folks at EcoAdapt for hosting. I hope you all have a fun and resilient and sustainable afternoon and rest of the week, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.